Hello, this is Mr. Bailey, and I am going to review some things that threw us for a loop, particularly on our language and writing test for SAT. So what I've done is, using analytics from students' responses, I've been able to figure out what specific things have thrown us for a loop. So the first difficult part that has been crushing us, the data, is rule number 9. We talked about using a colon. In fact, colons for the 3 questions that were on this assessment, we did poorly on all 3. So I feel like it's time to review that and to go specifically into the questions and what you should think about as a student as you approach those questions. So the rule that was taught that has been tested the most was rule number 9, use a colon leading into a list if you use a category that labels the list. There were not any questions about using colons between 2 independent clauses when one is evidence and the other one was the claim. Basically, all the questions that messed with us had to do with Rule 9, using a colon leading into a list. So the rule was that Mr. Bailey does these activities, and here's the label to the list: activities, and then weightlifting, running, basketball, and playing instruments. And I also wanted to point out that the list can be one item too. So example 2, working long hours, grading stacks of papers and projects, and having to deal with problems that students brought from home can only mean that she is employed in one profession. And actually, I shouldn't say profession, I should say one profession, and that is teaching. So here the list is 1, and then the label was profession, and it can be one thing long. So that's the rule, but how does it look like when we take a practice test? Well, I'm going to focus on 3 specific questions, and I'm going to mark them up to show like what you should be thinking about accordingly. So the first question that threw us for a loop was question number 17 right here. And it had to do with this passage about gerrymandering. So Jerry's tactics further. And question 17 was about this. So this image, combined with the governor's name, came to be known by a very specific name, gerrymandering. So the practice, unfortunately, continues to be a tool of political manipulation today. So the question was for number 17, no change, or do we change it to one of these 3 options? Well, first, a very specific name matches the label of what it is, gerrymandering. The list is literally one thing. So with that being only one thing, that is an appropriate use of the colon leading into that. So the correct answer was no change. The problem is that when you look at the options here, then it shows name, colon, which was gerrymandering. This is too many words. So basically the shortest answer right now too is still 17. Name, colon. Well, we can't use a colon after that, or a semicolon. That's terrible. And then the other thing was name, and it was, once again, we're using a bunch of needless words. So this was correct because here is the label and here is the list, and there's one thing there. And that's why question number 17, the correct answer was 7. It was A, no change. So then that brings us to question 28, which also threw us for a loop. And in this case, you actually had to change the answer rather than keeping no change. So the question is way down here about what the answer should be, but I'm going to go back up to the question. So if I read this, sometimes, as in the case of Michelangelo's famous sculpture David, the cleaning and restoration of artworks is a simple matter, applying chemicals, washing away grime, and scrubbing off the dirt. The first thing that you should be suspicious of is they go into a list of particulars right here, and then is a simple matter, but applying, washing, and scrubbing all have parallel structure, but this simple matter doesn't line up with that. So you should immediately go, something is not correct with this comma here, because you're not separating a list of 3 or more. So the question is, well, what should you replace, or what should you do with this? So the first option was matter, and then not have any punctuation at it. So when you look at it, is a simple matter, applying chemicals, washing away grime, and scrubbing off the dirt. That's inappropriate because there should be some sort of pause there, and in that case, there's no pause. So we would eliminate B. C is actually the correct answer because if we're applying the list rule, restoration is a simple matter, and then here's the list of things to do. So, and I'm going to type the text box. The restoration of artworks is a simple matter. And then the list is, what do you do that's the restoration? Well, step 1 is applying chemicals. comma, and I'm going to dot, dot, dot through the end of the sentence. So here it is. The simple matter is, well, what are they doing? They're doing a list of things. They're applying chemicals as part of the matter, washing away the grime is part of the matter, and scrubbing off the dirt is part of the matter, which is why the best answer is C. But once again, they try to mess with your head here, and they try to, oh, what about a semicolon there? Well, semicolons can only be used to separate two related independent clauses. If I were to put a semicolon here after matter, applying chemicals, washing away grime, and scrubbing off the dirt is not an independent clause. So that's why that eliminates it. Which then takes us to question 30, which is on the next page. In question 30, they tried to muddle things, and here it is. They would project some image of what the painting must have looked like originally and apply a variety of techniques up to and including repainting to preserve this original period. So I'm looking at that sentence, and the correct answer for this one was C, to and including. And that's because there's no reason for a pause and there's no reason for a colon here. Remember how we talked about that a colon is inappropriate in situations like this, where I'm looking at Mr. Bailey. I'm going to have to make the font bigger here. It's inappropriate to use a colon in this case. Mr. Bailey eats the following, eats food, including wings, fries, and carrots. I'm just making that list. It would be inappropriate to put the colon there. So you know that the colon is being misused in this particular situation. So the best option here is that there shouldn't be a comma there. There's too many disruptions in the flow at this point. So you can eliminate answer B. And it definitely should not use the colon, because that the rule we just went over, where like you don't need a colon right here. This is an inappropriate colon, is also being applied here. So the best answer in this case was good old letter C. But that's how you approach it. You're like, is this being used appropriately? And at this point, it's not. So the first thing to do is to eliminate the colon and to see how it flows. And if it flows, then you're good to go. So anyway, those are the three questions about colons that people really messed up on. And it really had to do with knowing this one, using a colon to lead into a list. If, and it shouldn't say if, it should say if you use a category that labels the list. It's just knowing when and if the label, and they do a lot of this, like the list is one item long, but basically all of this leads into one little consequent item in that list. So I hope that this clarified how you should approach those types of questions on the SAT and how to use colons effectively.